I kind of botched that a bit by excluding the prior verse or two, but you had that same idea in Psalm 15, right? The righteous man who lives according to God's will, who's doing the right thing, that kind of a man is not going to be moved. Again, why not? Because he's putting his trust in God. He's doing what God would have him to do, and he's determined about it. Circles back to Psalm 15:1, right? Who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly, worketh righteousness, and speaketh the truth in his heart. That kind of person is not going to be moved. He's set, he's determined, he's going to stand fast. And he's going to abide in the tabernacle, dwell in thy holy hill, God's holy hill. Here in 16:8, because he is at my right hand, the Lord, because he has set the Lord always before him, he says, I shall not be moved. I'm going to stand fast. Again, going back to the original, where this psalm started, preserve me, O God. In thee do I put my trust. Right? Preserve me. Protect me, guard me, watch out for me. I'm trusting you. He sets the Lord always before him. He's at his right hand, and he's not going to be moved. He is going to be preserved, right? No matter what comes his way, he's going to keep doing the things he ought to do. The Lord is going to be the portion of his inheritance and of his cup. He's going to maintain his lot. He's not going to be like those who hasten after other gods, who offer drink offerings of blood. He's going to be the person God wants him to be. Therefore, verse 9, my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope. Again, peace, security. He has these things. He has these things in the Lord. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. This particular verse 10 specifically is where the crux of the matter is in Acts 2 with Peter. Right? He quotes the overall passage towards the end of this psalm. But it's this one in particular, because Peter notes there in Acts 2 that David's sepulcher, his tomb, is still with them. I presume at that point in time, going back some 2,000 years to there in the first century at Pentecost, David's tomb was there. People knew where it was. You could point to it and say, "Look, David, his body is still there in the tomb." But of course, Peter's drawing the contrast between David and Christ. David was still in the tomb. Christ had come out of the tomb. Right? And he goes back and quotes from Psalm 16. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Again, in the King James Version, Holy One is capitalized. Because it's understood to be a reference to Christ because of how Peter uses this verse. So that would make it of messianic import and would make it prophetic in nature. Now, verse 11, thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Certainly implying, amongst other things, that there is such a thing as the path of life. You might even stress the definite article there, the path of life, right? Not just a path of life. Genuine joy is to be found in the presence of God or in complete fellowship with Him. And untold blessings are in the hand of God, and they are there for the taking to one who will be obedient to His divine will. Okay. Now, it's interesting. Sometimes, especially when you have these Old Testament passages, you might wonder, how is it that, as Jewish listeners in Peter's own day, how does a Jewish person take this passage and what might they think of it? How can you not read it and say, well, clearly he's talking about Christ. Clearly the King James translators think this. Again, they capitalize Holy One. So I actually have the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. This is the Jewish Study Bible. And from time to time, I find it interesting, a bit eye-opening, because it's, it is a Jewish Bible, quote unquote. It's the Old Testament only, and there's some unique things about it. The books are in a different order. And it's translated differently. This one is translated by the Jewish Publication Society. 99% of the time, the translation is pretty close to what you would find in an English translation of the Old Testament. That we would tend to use in a Christian context. Sometimes the translation is a bit different. So the way the JPS Tanakh renders 16:10, for you will not abandon me to Sheol, or let your faithful one see the pit. You will teach me the path of life, and your presence is perfect joy. Delights are ever in your right hand. So for one thing, in verse 10, interestingly enough, and I hadn't even noticed this earlier when I was preparing for this, but I see it now. In the Bible that I use, the English translation, Holy One is capitalized, again, because it's understood to be a reference to Christ, but thine isn't. As I'm thinking through this, looking at it, that makes sense because the King James doesn't capitalize pronouns. I would be curious to see, perhaps if you're watching this and you have the New King James, I may look this up myself after we finish the live stream, if thine is capitalized in the New King James. But in the JPS version, your, which is thine, thine, your, is capitalized. But faithful one isn't. Again, of course, because it's a Jewish translation, they don't see anything related to Christ in this. And Sheol is the word, translated hell in the English. You will not abandon me to Sheol, or let your faithful one see the pit. It's translated corruption in English. They translated pit. And it could actually, I went back and looked at the interlinear version, the original word, and evidently it can mean either of those. So if you're curious, if this is understood to be of prophetic messianic import, Peter quotes it in Acts 2. You will not suffer thine Holy One to see corruption, and the meaning is you're not going to let your son stay in the tomb. He's going to come out of the tomb before the body can be decayed. You say, well, how in the world do you square that? With how would a Jewish person disregard that? And it's because it's read completely differently. Reading from this, it gives a totally different impression. You will not abandon me to Sheol, or let your faithful one see the pit. And it kind of circles back to the original verse. Preserve me, O God, for in thee do I put my trust. So if you're translating it that way, it would mean the psalmist, David, is confident that God is going to preserve his life. He isn't going to be abandoned to Sheol. He isn't going to see the pit. In other words, he's going to stay alive. He isn't going to be killed by his enemies. Again, this familiar thought throughout many, many psalms. Those who would persecute him, he runs the risk of failing in life, of losing his life, and that isn't going to happen. Okay, so that is Psalm 16. Lord willing, we will continue on next week. We have some very, very lengthy ones coming up. The last couple that we've looked at, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, have all been relatively short Psalms. The next few that we're going to look at are considerably lengthier. I hope you've enjoyed studying a bit today, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
All the earth, you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign